They say some places are too quiet for tragedy. Strongsville, Ohio, a town stitched together by Little League fields, PTA meetings, and Sunday sermons, where front porches still carry laughter and teens rush home before curfew, a place where nothing ever truly happens until it does. On July 31st, 2022, that silence shattered not by gunfire, not by a break-in, but by something far more shocking: a teenager, a car, and a choice. What began as a summer night turned into a headline no one could make sense of. Teen girl drives 100 miles per hour into wall, 2 killed. But this wasn't a crash. This was calculated. At the center of this case, Mackenzie Shirilla, 17 years old at the time of the crash. Spirited, in love, and unraveling, she and her boyfriend Dominic Russo had shared passion and pain. Their love story wasn't simple. It was fiery, possessive, and slowly suffocating. That morning, she climbed behind the wheel with 2 passengers, Dominic and their friend, Davion Flanagan. What happened next was not a misjudgment. It was not an accident. It was premeditated murder, caught on camera, confirmed by technology, and planned in the shadows of teenage obsession.
Welcome to Crime Bite.
In this channel, we peel back the layers of those hidden realities, raw evidence, conflicting testimonies, and emotional pleas for help that too often come too late. By looking into these crime bites, you'll see firsthand how broken trust, systemic oversights, and chilling motives can converge into stories that rattle us to the core. If you find this exploration as vital as we do, be sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notifications button. Together, we can shine a light on the cases that demand attention, ensuring every voice, especially the silenced, finds the audience it deserves. Strongsville was the kind of place where people didn't just live, they settled, where backyards hosted graduation parties and kids rode bikes until streetlights blinked on. The rhythm of daily life was quiet and familiar, a town stitched together by Friday night football, community fairs, and sleepy Sunday mornings filled with the chime of church bells. But on July 31st, 2022, that rhythm broke like shattered glass. Just before 6:30 a.m., emergency dispatchers received a call that shattered the town's sleepy calm. A car had crashed. Not a fender bender, not a deer hit in the early dawn, but something far more violent. The kind of crash that doesn't echo, it detonates. At the intersection of Progress Drive and Alameda Drive, firefighters and EMTs sprinted onto a scene so gruesome it would etch itself into their memories forever. A 2018 Toyota Camry had slammed full force into a brick wall. The vehicle's front end crushed like paper, debris flung across the lot. Inside the wreckage lay 3 teenagers. Mackenzie Shirilla, 17 at the time of the crash, lay unconscious in the driver's seat, miraculously alive. Dominic Russo, 20 years old, was already gone. Davion Flanagan, just 19, was pronounced dead on the scene. There were no skid marks to suggest panic, no signs of evasive maneuvers. It was as if the car had accelerated into death. But this was just the beginning. In the coming months, grief would give way to rage, confusion would give way to horror, and a picture would emerge, one more disturbing than anyone in Strongsville was ready for. This wasn't an accident, not a tragic mistake, not a lapse in judgment. This was intentional. Mackenzie Shirilla, the girl who had once posed for prom pictures and giggled with her friends at late-night hangouts, was now suspected of turning her car into a murder weapon. And the question that haunted every parent, every teenager, and every corner of that town was, why? What drives a teenager on the cusp of adulthood to weaponize a moment of heartbreak into something irreversible? When does emotional pain transform into deadly resolve? They looked like any young couple caught in the highs and lows of teen romance. Mackenzie Shirilla and Dominic Russo were inseparable once, flirting at school dances, whispering during movies, sneaking away to drive aimlessly through suburban streets lit only by headlights and hormones. On social media, they curated a love story that seemed sweet, intense, a little chaotic, but normal. But their reality was far from picture perfect. By the summer of 2022, their relationship had become a tightrope walk, one wobble away from disaster. Friends described it as passionate but toxic. One moment, they were laughing in fast food parking lots. The next, they were arguing so loudly at parties that people would walk away, uncomfortable. Dominic, by most accounts, was charming but nonchalant. He had dreams but wasn't in a rush to define them. Mackenzie, on the other hand, was intense, expressive, and emotionally volatile. She felt everything deeply: love, betrayal, anger, abandonment. When she was happy, she lit up a room. When she wasn't, everyone around her felt the chill. Their breakup in July wasn't their first, but this time, it felt final. Dominic had begun pulling away, spending time with friends, possibly seeing someone new. Mackenzie spiraled. Friends reported seeing her cry at random, lash out at texts, beg him to come back. The more Dominic detached, the tighter Mackenzie clung. It was no longer about love, it was about control. The desperation became palpable. Some friends said she threatened to harm herself. Others weren't sure how serious she was, until the crash proved she was capable of going to unimaginable lengths. What no one saw coming, what no one could have prepared for, was that Mackenzie wouldn't just end the relationship, she would end everything. Can teen heartbreak be dangerous? How do we distinguish between emotional immaturity and a warning sign for something far more destructive? July 31st, 2022. It was supposed to be a normal night. Mackenzie, Dominic, and their mutual friend Davion Flanagan piled into Mackenzie's Toyota Camry. They cruised through suburban streets, listening to music, laughing, and maybe escaping whatever emotional storm lingered beneath the surface. But as midnight approached, Mackenzie took a turn. Literally and metaphorically, they entered Progress Drive in Strongsville, a dead-end industrial stretch, quiet and deserted after dark. A place where nobody would expect a car to speed, let alone crash. In a matter of seconds, the car reached 100 miles per hour. Then, impact. No screech, no brake marks, just twisted metal, crushed lives, and one survivor. Why would a teen accelerate down a dead-end street at that speed? Was this a mistake or a message? First responders arrived to a scene that would haunt them forever. The Toyota was barely recognizable, crushed, crumpled like paper against the wall of an industrial building. The engine was silent. So were two of the passengers. Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan were pronounced dead at the scene. Mackenzie Shirilla was found unconscious in the driver's seat, miraculously alive. Emergency crews had to pry her from the wreck with the jaws of life. She was rushed to the hospital, still breathing, but the story was only just beginning. In the hours that followed, a whisper began to spread. This wasn't just a tragic accident. Something about the crash didn't make sense. Why was the car going that fast? Why no skid marks? And why, of all places, did she drive down a dead-end street she knew well? When the physical evidence doesn't match an accident, how long before suspicion turns to certainty? At first, Mackenzie Shirilla was viewed with a strange mixture of sympathy and confusion. She was, after all, a teenage girl who had survived a horrific crash, one that had claimed 2 young lives, including her boyfriend's. She had been pulled from the mangled wreck unconscious, her body battered and bruised. For a moment, people held their breath, unsure whether she would even live to tell the tale. But as the fog of trauma began to lift and the adrenaline faded from the crash scene, detectives turned their attention to the cold, hard questions. They weren't just piecing together what happened. They were searching for intent. That's when the picture started to shift. Investigators discovered a critical clue: surveillance footage from a nearby business. It showed Mackenzie's vehicle turning onto Progress Drive. Then, without pause, she accelerated, hard. There was no attempt to slow, no signs of swerving, no flicker of indecision. She hit the gas, straight toward the wall. The footage painted a portrait not of panic, but of precision. And that was just the beginning. Digging deeper, detectives uncovered a trail of reckless behavior and digital breadcrumbs. Just weeks before the crash, Mackenzie had been caught driving dangerously, nearly losing control on a suburban road. Friends had reported her driving fast when upset, using her car as an emotional outlet. But more disturbing than her behind-the-wheel behavior were her words. Her social media was filled with cryptic posts, a mix of heartbreak, bitterness, and vague threats. There were photos captioned with skull emojis, songs about revenge, and ominous TikTok clips where she lip-synced lyrics about regret and never forgiving. Then came the turning point. Police retrieved the black box data from the Camry, the vehicle's digital memory. It told the story the survivors couldn't. The acceleration was deliberate. No foot hit the brake, no hand twisted the wheel to avoid impact. She had driven straight into the wall. From survivor, Mackenzie Shirilla was now under suspicion. The town held its breath. This wasn't just a tragic accident. It was a premeditated act, and suddenly, Every parent, teacher, and friend who knew her found themselves questioning, had she always been capable of this? And could someone, anyone, have stopped her before it was too late? What makes a teenager go from reckless to intentional? How do we know when pain becomes a motive and when emotion becomes a weapon? Strongsville, Ohio may not have been used to tragedy, but it felt this one in its bones. The crash didn't just break a wall, it shattered the community's sense of safety, of normalcy, of how well they truly knew their youth. Dominic Russo, charismatic and full of swagger, was the kind of guy people gravitated toward. He had energy, a spark, the sort of presence that made you want to be part of his orbit. Davion Flanagan, on the other hand, was quieter, gentle, kind-hearted, always the one offering rides home or checking in on friends. They had both been on the cusp of their adult lives, futures wide open, dreams only just beginning to take shape. As word of their death spread, students gathered near the crash site. They left candles, posted photos, scribbled messages on poster boards. "We love you. You didn't deserve this. You'll never be forgotten." Some stood in stunned silence. Others broke down, unable to comprehend the loss. Strongsville High School held grief counseling sessions. Church vigils were organized. Fundraisers popped up online. Parents hugged their children tighter. The community mourned, but beneath the grief, an unsettling question loomed like a shadow. Did Mackenzie mean to do it? As days passed and the news trickled out, rumors turned to revelations. Mackenzie and Dominic's relationship, once seen as teenage love, was being re-examined. Friends came forward. They spoke about fights, about threats, about possessiveness. One student recalled Dominic saying, "I just need space from her for a while." Another said Mackenzie once told them, "If I ever lose him, I'll lose it completely." The narrative was changing. No longer a tragic fluke, no longer a mistake. People began wondering if this had been brewing for months. Had this crash been the final act in a story that had been unraveling quietly? Had love turned into obsession? And how many times had the warning signs been ignored? When love turns toxic in teens, who's paying attention? Are the signs always invisible, or are we just too afraid to look? Investigators obtained Mackenzie's phone. What they found painted a chilling portrait of obsession and unraveling control. Her texts to Dominic became more erratic in the weeks leading to the crash. One read, "You'll be sorry, watch." Snapchat messages hinted at fights and ultimatums. TikTok videos revealed a girl showing off her confidence, but some captions hinted at deeper turmoil. A haunting playlist titled "Final Drive" was uncovered on her phone, but it wasn't just the messages. Friends told police Mackenzie had once said, "If I can't have him, no one can." It was a line that echoed through the interrogation room later. Can heartbreak really drive someone to murder? And what role does social media play in amplifying teenage despair? By the time Mackenzie stood trial, she was 19 years old. The charges were heavy, 2 counts of murder, among others. The prosecution argued this wasn't an accident. It was a calculated act of vengeance. They played the surveillance footage in court. The moment she pressed the accelerator, the dead-end road, the impact. Mackenzie's defense claimed she was unconscious, traumatized, not in her right mind. But the black box data, texts, and behavior before the crash made the jury question everything. In the words of the prosecution, this was not reckless driving. This was murder with a steering wheel. When a killer is a teenager, how should justice be served? By age or by action? On August 14th, 2023, the court found Mackenzie Shirilla guilty of 2 counts of murder. The courtroom erupted, some in relief, some in tears. Dominic's and Davion's families embraced. Justice at last. But the weight of it hung heavy. 2 lives lost, 1 life sentenced. So many others forever scarred. Mackenzie was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. Some called her evil. Others said she was a broken teen who never got the help she needed. The conversation had shifted from crime to consequence, from justice to prevention. Could this tragedy have been prevented with earlier intervention? And how do we help teens who are spiraling before they reach the point of no return? The story of Mackenzie Shirilla isn't just a crime. It's a cautionary tale about teen love that turns deadly, about the power of anger, about the roads we take, literally and emotionally, when we feel we've lost everything. Schools have since started talking more openly about toxic relationships. Mental health programs gained urgency. But for Dominic and Davion, it's too late. Mackenzie's car became a weapon. Her heartbreak, a fuse, her rage, the spark. It was a moment of choice that changed everything. How many lives could be saved if we listened harder before the crash? 2 boys are gone, a young woman's future, gone with them. And a town once defined by its stillness is now haunted by the noise of what could have been stopped. If someone had only listened, only looked deeper. In the end, it wasn't just steel that broke that morning. It was trust, it was innocence, and it was the terrifying truth that sometimes the most dangerous roads start at home. Dominic Russo, Davion Flanagan, never forgotten. Like, if you believe every red flag in a toxic relationship should be taken seriously, comment your thoughts. Could someone have stopped this tragedy? Subscribe for more untold true crime stories, because behind every headline is a life, a choice, and a warning.